Hi guys, welcome to lesson 4C. Again, we're continuing to talk about things that very much have a grammatical bent, certainly more so than other units are going to have during the course of the school year. But the big thing to keep in mind about this isn't just grammar for grammar's sake. It's got those two purposes that I outlined for you before. This is grammar either to A, hopefully draw conclusions and make generalizations about author's style. And so as a consequence of that, we need to understand a little bit about the grammar so we can observe what tendencies an author's style possesses. But also, of course, the corollary of that is if it helps you write a little bit better as well, that's obviously not a bad thing. So it sort of covers those two bases as we continue to talk about grammar. And again, that's all, part and parcel of what we do when we rhetorically analyze something. We're looking at how the style is, yes, influenced by diction, aka word choice, but also syntax, and that's where this grammar stuff comes in, which is word order, sentence construction, things of that sort. All right. So without any further ado, let's jump into this. As I said, this particular topic is sentence structure and arrangement. So sort of how sentences are constructed. And obviously, you guys didn't get to AP Lang without having some sense of how you organize a sentence. But the thing is, we need to know, again, how to break the rules, when the rules need to be broken. We need to know when we're breaking the rules. We need to know when authors that we're reading are breaking the rules, things of that sort. So that's why we're talking about it in this case, all right? So first thing we mention here is just this, and hopefully this is something that would be obvious to you even without necessarily my tutelage. Sentence simplicity and length can be used to appear direct and succinct or to contrast with longer sentences. So the simplest way we can look at syntax whenever we're talking about author style is just, well, how long are the sentences? Do we get these incredibly long, complex sentences, or do we get a lot of shorter sentences? Do we juxtapose those two different types? A little bit long, a little bit short, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth? Do we have lots of long sentences and then a passage with short? We need to be on the lookout for those things and ask ourselves, well, how are they contributing to the rhetorical effect of what's going on in this particular passage? So just simplicity and length are the first thing that you just want to be on the lookout for as you're rhetorically analyzing texts, okay? Now, the other thing, of course, is this concept of coordination and subordination, which can show the relationship between ideas in a sentence. And really, if you think about those words, and you're in any way familiar with those words, I mean, if you think about two things that are coordinating together are sort of like equal. They're partners. They're working together. Whereas subordination means that one is going to be a subordinate to the other, sort of inferior or less prominent, something along those lines. And as you'll see, that contributes a lot to what we're talking about as we describe coordination and subordination. So those two concepts join parts of sentences to emphasize important ideas, give readers information, and add rhythm to writing, okay? So what are we talking about when we're talking about this? Well, coordination is going to join two ideas with a coordinating conjunction, which I mentioned to you in the last lesson, but didn't necessarily spell out for you as I'm doing right here. Why? Well, because I knew I was going to do it right here. So remember when we were talking about independent and main clauses, we said that you could have a compound sentence if you used a coordinating conjunction to unite those two sentences. Well, that's coordination, okay? Remember, you've got an independent main clause on one side, you've got an independent main clause on the other side, and as a consequence of that, they're equal, okay? Neither one of them is a subordinate clause. They're both equal, and they're joined together by that coordinating conjunction. This has a tendency to show that both ideas are equally important because, again, neither of them are subordinate. They're both of equal value. So that's sort of a construction that authors will use to say, here's this idea, I believe in them both equally, they're both equally valuable. And just to clarify furthermore, I know I mentioned these before, but to make your life a little bit easier, there they are. When we're talking about coordinating conjunctions, we're talking about the fanboys. And fanboys we are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So those are those words that precede the second independent main clause in a compound sentence, okay? The other thing to keep in mind just about those coordinating conjunctions in particular, though, is when you've got words like but or yet, they do have a tendency to sort of subvert that concept of coordination. So I just went to all this length to explain to you guys, hey, when you've got coordination and two ideas are equal. Well, that's not necessarily true if you're going to specifically use those coordinating conjunctions but or yet. That has a tendency to subvert that. So just something to keep in mind if you're starting to employ this in a more meaningful way, okay? Now, on the flip side, of course, is that subordination. So that's going to join two ideas with a subordinating conjunction. And really, subordinating conjunctions are the things that I alluded to before that take an independent main clause and turn it into a subordinate dependent clause, okay? So just to skip down here for a moment, those are some examples that I gave you before. When, because, until, if. If you put those at the beginning of a quote-unquote complete sentence, it's now no longer a complete sentence. Why? Because you've taken an independent main clause and turned it into a subordinate dependent clause. So again, you can see, because they have to attach to something else, that's why we generally look at them as a little less important than the independent main clause that it's attached to. So that's what this bullet point right above that is all about. Usually shows that one idea is less important than the other. Okay? So that's pretty standard and straightforward there. Let's bring it down to our next topic then, which is, of course, qualifications, details, and modifications. So how do we take sentences and use them creatively, interestingly? I mean, obviously, there are an infinite supply of different sentence constructions. So what are some things that we can do to just make sure that the sentences are all the more unique and meaningful and significant for the reader? Well, we're starting off here with a periodic sentence. A sentence that begins with details, qualification, or modifications building towards the independent clause. So that doesn't mean that it starts with a subordinate clause. It might start with a subordinate clause, but it's the independent clause is going to come second, and before that is going to be other details. It could be a phrase, could be a subordinate dependent clause, could be just other terminology that's used uniquely in some fashion. But you're going to present that information first and then lead into the independent main clause. So you're sort of delaying the introduction of that independent main clause. That's what a periodic sentence is all about. So that's one of those options you've got at your disposal. That's also one of those things where, you want to make sure that you can be on the lookout if you're doing a rhetorical analysis and that author has a tendency to do something like that in meaningful situations, okay? The cumulative sentence, then, is really just the polar opposite of that. It's a sentence in which the independent clause is followed by the details, qualification, or modifications in subordinate clauses or phrases. So you start off with the independent main clause that can stand all by itself, and then if you want to introduce additional phrases, additional subordinate clauses, or any qualification of when this is true or when this isn't true or why you believe this or things along those lines, that comes after the main clause, okay? So that would be a cumulative sentence in that case, all right? And then, of course, the flip side of that would be the thing we call a parenthetical or interrupted sentence, okay? This is when a clause or phrase interrupts a sentence to provide information that is typically not essential to understanding the writer's main point, but still helps writers achieve their purpose or speak to the audience's needs. So, the English language doesn't always move completely linearly. And we have that option in a lot of situations to interrupt what we're saying in the middle of a sentence. So it's very possible that you could, in writing a parenthetical or interrupted sentence, start this, well, let's put it this way. Write a main independent clause, and then as you're doing that, go back in there and between the subject and the verb, add some additional information, possibly in between commas, something along those lines, that helps us to understand what that main independent clause is talking about. That's what we do with a parenthetical or interrupted sentence. So keep in mind, these are all just different flavors of the same food, okay? Periodic sentence, you're putting extra stuff before the main independent clause. Cumulative sentence, you're putting stuff after the main independent clause. Parenthetical interrupted, you're putting it in the middle of a main independent clause, okay? Now, to sort of summarize a lot of what that is all about then, we have this. In short, periodic sentences have information before the independent main clause. Cumulative sentences after, and parenthetical interrupted sentences in the middle. That's what I just clarified for you, but there it is spelled out for you in case you need some assistance in reflecting upon that in the future, okay? Lastly, we have a couple more sentence types that we just want to make sure that we're aware of. Some of these you may even remember from elementary and middle school. I know that we didn't necessarily use the term hortative, but certainly it's one of those that you want to make sure that you're familiar with. What is a hortative sentence? Well, that's that sentence that exhorts, hence the hortative, exhorts, urges, and treats, implores, or calls to action, okay? So, telling people what to do or when to do it or why to do it or how to do it in a very passionate kind of way. You sort of beseeching them, requesting of them, compelling them in some way, shape, or form. That's your hortative sentence. So, if you were to do a rhetorical analysis and see lots of those in there, well, that's going to affect the author's influence and the author's effect and things of that sort. Whereas it's a little bit different than the imperative sentence, which I know you probably remember from middle and elementary school, because now you've got that a sentence that issues a command. This is the one that says, you will do this. You do this now. Oftentimes with that understood you, which doesn't have to appear in the sentence itself, that the classic go make me a sandwich kind of statement. Well, it doesn't have the subject you in the sentence, but you is still the subject of the sentence. And that's what I say there, often with an implied rather than explicit second-person subject, okay? And then, of course, don't forget interrogative sentences. We're studying rhetoric, and probably really for most of you, the only time you've ever used the term rhetoric before is talking about rhetorical questions. Well, use them, okay? They're rhetorical for a reason. So, by all means, feel like you can be posing questions, asking questions, if you see that as accomplishing your goals, whatever they happen to be for a specific rhetorical assignment. But also, of course, being on the lookout for those things when you're doing a rhetorical analysis of someone else's work. Okay. Last two things we've got here are some really rhetorical terms, not ones that I expect you to know from other situations, but also not, I don't think, terribly ridiculous either. They're pretty straightforward. So we've got polysyndeton, the deliberate use of multiple conjunctions between coordinate phrases, clauses, or words. So case in point, I mean, you could say something along the lines of, if you have a normal sentence like, we went to the store, the mall, and the movies, okay? You could say we went to the store and the mall and the movies. Okay, that's you have that option, okay? That series don't usually have all of those things. Well, you can do that a little bit differently if you want to in that case, all right? Whereas the asyndeton, of course, is the omission, okay? Now we're not going to include them at all. And, there are a lot of times when I very strategically will do polysyndetons and asyndetons in my writing if I feel like it accomplishes a specific end goal. So now, you would say, we went to the I don't remember where we went to a couple of moments ago, but that doesn't matter. We went to the grocery store, the mall, and the movies. Well, now you can just say, we went to the grocery store, mall, movies. We actually use that a lot in the Tiger Times because you very often will omit that coordinating conjunction whenever you've got a series in the headline of an article. So that's something that pops up a great deal, okay? So those are just some sentence construction concepts and ideas that, again, you should be on the lookout for when you're doing a rhetorical analysis of somebody else's writing, but also, hopefully you can experiment and practice with them in your own writing, and as a consequence of that, really satisfy the rhetorical goals of your writing more intelligently and easily just because of your flexibility with style that you might possess. So that's the point. So that's that sentence structure and arrangement, guys. As always, come to class with any questions or concerns you may happen to have. And I think that's all I got to say to you. So I will see you shortly, friends.